The first of those two quotes today, Corona Vincenti Datur, a crown is given to the conqueror, is a play on words. It's taken from the hymn of today's saint, the deacon martyr, Saint Vincent. Vincent comes from the Latin vincens, which is to conquer. St. Vincent's bishop had a bit of a speech impediment. He wasn't able to fulfill his duty of preaching the gospel because of it. And so he had his faithful deacon, Vincent, do all of his preaching in his stead. Now, as news reached the Roman governor at the time, Dacian, Vincent was arrested, scourged, put on the rack. He was laid on a gridiron like St. Lawrence and roasted. His flesh was torn with iron hooks, and he was led to prison, the floor of which was covered with broken glass, so that he could neither walk nor lie down without pain. But nothing could break his resolution to preach the gospel. And because none of these pains could shake his resolve, he was then given a soft bed in the hopes, so the enemy thought, that Vincent would then give up the gospel for the sake of luxury and comfort. Instead, Vincent, the conqueror, died. A cozy bed was the worst sort of torture that they could have chosen for him. Corona Vincenti Datur. A crown is given to the conqueror, to Vincent, on that day. Now, from the perspective of the world, it would seem that St. Vincent was conquered rather than that he conquered. After all, his enemies put him to death, right? He was one less deacon to preach the gospel, right? And so his enemies won. But the devil, remember, he is the prince of this world. He is the ape of God. What is victory to God is defeat to him. And what is defeat to God is apparent victory to the devil. In the world of sports and of competition, the trophy always goes to the aggressor, he who proves himself to be physically stronger. It's especially noticed in football, boxing, cage fighting. And fine gold, silver, and bronze are given to them, a crown. In debates, the reward goes to him who has the superior intellect. But in the eyes of God, in spiritual matters, it is always just the opposite. Didn't Christ conquer hell by means of the cross, by means of his death? Didn't he say that only the childlike shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, not the mighty and the strong and the powerful, the childlike, the little ones of the world? And doesn't he say that he chooses the weak things of the earth to confound the strong? And how often in Catholic history we've seen that this is true. The Virgin Martyrs, St. Agnes, for example, we celebrated her feast yesterday. They are often depicted not with crowns of gold, fine jewels, but crowns of a floral wreath. And the reason is this, that those flowers, those vines, their roots are in the ground. That is to symbolize humility, that we conquer, the Christian conquers by humility. And so St. Paul today, speaking to the Romans, he gives us a program for dealing with our neighbor, be he a friend or an enemy. Briefly, he says this: be of one mind, not minding high things. In other words, he tells us, be modest and be humble. Those are virtues which will serve toward mutual agreement. In other words, maybe this is an easier way to remember it. Don't look down your nose upon others. Don't look at them as more lowly because they're not as rich or as smart or as beautiful as you are. And then he says, be not wise in your own conceit. In other words, do not have such a high opinion of yourself and your own judgment as to despise and refuse the counsel of others. Maybe an easier way to remember this is, don't be self-conceited. He tells us, thirdly, provide good things not only in the sight of God, but of all men. In other words, seek always to edify by your virtuous life. And he says, fourthly, if it be possible, mark those words, if it be possible, have peace with all men. But it is not always possible. We cannot compromise on matters of faith or morals, for example, for the sake of peace. But other than that, we should try to have peace with all men. But then St. Paul goes on to tell us how to act towards our neighbors. And I think under this category you can also include those who get on your very last nerve, those of your own household, even your friends and your family. He tells us this, Noli vinci a malo, said vince, there is again from the same as Vincent, vince in bono malum. Be not overcome by evil, but overcome, conquer evil by good. So as I said, when one gets on your very last nerve, the answer is not to try to get back at him. It's not to prove that you're in the right all the time. That's not what it's about. When we are persecuted, when we are mocked, when people say unkind words to us or downright nasty ones about us, our victory will most often be in humble silence, not in argumentative words, not our reaction to what he has said. If we react in a violent manner, verbally or otherwise, then we've already been conquered. But when evil is done to us by another, St. Paul tells us this, we are not only to avoid doing evil to the person, he says, and this is where we all kind of shrink back, he tells us we are to do good to the one who has offended us. I know it doesn't feel good to do this, to let someone else win an argument, for example, to say nothing in response to a verbal attack. It might feel like you've been defeated, but this is just the worldly, the natural viewpoint. St. Vincent de Paul gave good advice. This is a quote of his. Let us beware of complaints, resentments, and evil speaking against those who are discontented with us, or who try to destroy our plans, or who even persecute us with injuries, insults, and calumnies. Rather, let us go on treating them, our enemy, cordially at first, or more so, as far as possible, showing them esteem, always speaking well of them, doing them good, serving them on occasion, even to the point of taking shame and disgrace upon ourselves, if necessary, to save their honor. All this ought to be done to overcome evil with good, according to the teaching of the apostles. And St. Francis de Sales, he's the saint of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. We celebrate his feast day next Sunday. He gives us a perfect example in his own life. There was in France a local attorney who hated him for no apparent reason. He constantly spoke ill about St. Francis. He persecuted him. He would go around the church and rip down the notices that the holy bishop would put up. He even vandalized St. Francis's confessional. And St. Francis, he knew all of this. He knew exactly who did it. And on any occasion he could, he would go up to him and greet him with a hearty handshake and would speak kindly to him. It never worked. So on another occasion he said directly to him, "I see that you hate me, and I don't know why. But even if you were to put out one of my eyes, I would still look upon you as my best friend with my other eye." Still, it had no good reaction in this man. The man even on one occasion tried to kill St. Francis. He was looking out the window and St. Francis was walking down the street. He took aim and shot and fired. It missed St. Francis but hit the vicar who was walking beside him. Well, the man was put in prison, sentenced to death. St. Francis went to the government and obtained his pardon. He went himself afterwards to give the good news to this man and to ask him to put aside his grudges and all of his hatred. St. Francis was only met with more calumnies and insults. St. Francis got on his knees. He begged the man to forgive him for whatever he had done. Nothing worked. They say that afterwards he left the letter of pardon on the man's bed and walked out, leaving him to the judgment of God. This is how we heap coals of fire upon our enemy, as St. Paul tells us. Not by vengeance, but by our kindness and our generosity towards those who do evil to us. By doing that, we unintentionally inflict upon him those healing pains of remorse and repentance for his conduct towards you, and so we win his conversion. Be not overcome by evil, but overcome evil by good. This is the lesson, really, to sum up. Let us, who are Christians, hopefully not just in name only, but in our behavior, let us rise above our fickle emotions and be strong spiritually. Suppress those thoughts of revenge which may arise, and resolve to treat not just our friends, but even and more especially our enemies with charity, and whenever possible to do good to them. This will be the greatest victory and the source in this life of the greatest peace that you can ever gain over yourself. And then it will be said to you on the day of judgment, Corona vincenti datur. A crown is given to the conqueror. May God bless